Here we go again with the second part of our story from yesterday. Okay, it's going to be another long video, so without any lengthy intros, I think you're already tired of my life updates, so let's start. On Thursday morning, I was at work and received another call from Michael Hamilton. Hello Mr. Taylor. Thought I would bring you up to date on current events. Stan Morrison just quit. He didn't give a notice. He just walked in, cleaned out his desk, told the boss and left. He told one of the other people in the office that he was moving to Florida. Well, that's interesting. Thank you Mr. Hamilton. I appreciate you telling me. Oh, by the way, how are you getting along? Pretty well, thank you for asking. My wife has confessed to stealing and has copped a plea. She will get a light sentence, but her boyfriend is looking at a pretty lengthy stay in prison. I hope he serves every single day as some big duck Bubba's girlfriend. I laughed. We chatted another couple of minutes and ended the call. Then I called Judy. Hi. I was just thinking about you, she said when she answered. How long have you known that Stan Morrison was moving to Fort Lauderdale? Up until now I don't think she knew that I knew his name. A long silence. Judy, how long have you known? Trey, how long? A few days. How many times have they seen each other since she moved there? Trey, listen to. How many ducking times have they seen each other since she moved there? A short pause. 4. She's been here twice and he's gone there twice. They've seen each other 4 times that you know about. And you were okay with knowing that she was still ducking that a hole, and you were okay with her coming back to me after all that. I went back to my cubicle. Trey Taylor. Trey, please don't hang up. I hung up and walked over to the receptionist. No more calls for me today. I'm going home. I turned down my street and saw Judy's car sitting in front of my house. I pulled in my driveway and into my garage. The garage door closed before she got to it, so she went to the front door and knocked. I guess she still remembered my threat about what I would do if she rang the bell. I went into the house through the garage and into the kitchen. She was still knocking. I decided to open the door. You're not welcome here. Trey, listen. I closed the door in her face. I didn't slam it this time. I love Italian food, so I heated a frozen spaghetti and meatball dinner and went to my bedroom. By 10 p.m., I was asleep. The next morning I showered, shaved, dressed and went to work. Judy was waiting for me. I guess she thought I wouldn't cause a scene at work. She was wrong. I tried to walk past her. She grabbed my arm. Gosh darn it, Trey, listen to me. You have nothing to say I want to hear. But I've got something to say to you. You were willing to let her come back to me knowing she ducked that low-life son of a witch over and over, and you weren't going to tell me. All 3 of you can rot in hell. It was a long time before I saw her again, but she talked to my mother occasionally. So now the whole dealership was aware of my situation. It had the makings of a long day. I paced around the dealership for a couple of hours trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I managed to get through the day and headed home. My mother called and invited me to dinner. I went and she had Italian, of course. She, my stepfather and I enjoyed the meal and most of the evening. The enjoyment ended when she said, I spoke to Judy today. Mom, another word about that family and I'm leaving. Trey, listen to me. There's something you don't know. I know all I need to, Mom. Jody cheated and I'm divorcing her. Okay, that's fine. She cheated and you're divorcing her. But what are you going to do about the baby? Oh, Mom. You're not going to fall for that, are you? There's nothing to fall for, Trey. She's pregnant. I talked to her myself when she was here. You what? I literally jumped up. I saw her and she told me. She was here and you didn't tell me. Trey, she asked us not to. So you listened to a certified cheating horse and disregarded the feelings of your own son. We thought you needed a little more time to forgive her. Forgive her? Are you crazy? Have you forgotten what your life was like living with a cheater? Sweetie, things are different now. It's a different world. People are freer to try new things, and I stormed out of the house. Was I living in some universe where everything was upside down and backwards? My mother lived through hell as my father cheated time after time, and now she's telling me that it might be alright for my wife to cheat. I love my mother, but her naivety was amazing and gullible. God help her, but in the age of smartphones and the internet, she would still buy an encyclopedia from a traveling salesman. But to tell me I should forgive Jody was way over the line even for her. I headed home but drove by my house and didn't stop. I ended up at the dealership. I had keys so I went in. There was a sofa in the employee's break room so I lay down and tried to slow my mind down. It didn't work. I tossed and turned until almost 5 before falling asleep. I woke up at 10:30. The boss had come in at some point and had seen me asleep, so he put a sign on the door and told everybody not to bother me. When I did start moving around, one of the other salesmen told me that the boss wanted to see me in his office. I felt horrible. My back hurt from sleeping on the sofa, I needed a shower and shave, and my mouth tasted terrible, but I went to see the boss. Trey, you need some time off and I have just the way you can get it. Do you remember the Jacobsons, that elderly couple you sold the nice blue Prevost to a few months ago? Yes. Well, they were in Vancouver, Canada, last week and he had a heart attack. He will be okay, but the coach needs to get home. They want somebody to bring it back for them, and they asked for you. Sounds right up my alley right about now. When can I leave? You can fly out tomorrow. Jenny will get you a flight. Use the company credit card for expenses. Sounds good. Now get your bum home, clean up and pack. It should take about 4 days to get back. If I were you, I'd take 10. The Jacobsons are in no big hurry, and I certainly don't need you back here too soon. Just give Ben any deals you have pending, and he can handle them for you. I went straight to the hospital when I arrived in Vancouver. Mr. Jacobson had lots of tubes and machines attached to and sticking out of him, and Mrs. Jacobson was puttering around trying to make him more comfortable, and he was grousing about her bothering him and not letting him sleep. They both had smiles on their faces. It was obvious they just wanted to be near each other and seemed to be grateful that they were. I stood there for several minutes, content to watch. I realized that I was smiling for the first time in a long time. Mrs. Jacobson looked up and saw me. Trey, it's good to see you, as she hugged me. Hey Trey, how was your flight? Piped up Mr. Jacobson. Now be quiet, Robert. You know what the doctor said, said Mrs. Jacobson. She patted my arm. I can tell him to be quiet now, and he can't argue with me because it's doctor's orders. She winked at me. We sat, talked and watched as Robert floated in and out of sleep. Every time we thought he was out, a nurse would come in and check his vitals or adjust his medication or some other medical-related task. Mrs. Jacobson told me where the motor coach was. She also told me that 2 of their grandchildren had been with them, but their grandson had flown home. Their granddaughter was packing a few things for them to take home with them when Robert was released, but she, the granddaughter, would be riding back with me. Darla, she indicated her granddaughter, has been driving our car this last week or so. We towed it behind the coach. She will take you to the coach so you can do whatever it is that you need to get it ready to go. Darla started to protest, but was cut off. Now, stop it, Darla. I told you we will be fine, so don't worry about us. She looked at me. No offense, Trey, but Darla doesn't want to go back with you. She thinks she needs to stay with us. By the way, Trey, your boss told us that it might take you a few extra days to get back because you were taking some time off. You might want to consider going through Yellowstone. We promised Darla we would go through there on our way home. I'll see what I can do, Mrs. Jacobson. And we started to leave. Oh Trey, here's a letter authorizing you to take the coach across the border. Your boss said it might be a good idea. She said, taking a letter from her purse. She handed it to me and kissed me on the cheek. Thank you for doing this and be careful. Darla and I headed for the car and then to the RV park. She drove but bitched and moaned the whole time, but never said a word directly to me. I tried several times to start a conversation, but she made it clear she wasn't interested, so I looked out the side window. When we arrived at the coach, she immediately went inside. I wanted to hook the car to the coach and be ready for an early morning departure, but she had taken the car keys inside with her. I went in and asked her for them. She literally threw them at me, and I had to duck to keep from being hit in the eye. What is wrong with you? I asked as I reached down to pick them up. For the last few weeks I had dealt with asshole women, and I was getting pretty damn tired of it. I went to the car, positioned it behind the coach and hitched it. I did my walk-around inspection of the coach, then sat in one of the lawn chairs. After a short break I thought it would be nice to have a cold beer, so I put the chairs and a small table in one of the lower storage compartments of the coach, then went inside to see if the Jacobsons had any beer. Darla was looking in the refrigerator. Any beer in there? Or anything good to eat? I'm not your ducking maid. As she slammed the refrigerator door and went into the bedroom and closed the door. That was it. Ducky's attitude in a woman. I'd been shit on enough, Jody, Judy, my mother and now this which I didn't even know. I was fed up with them. All of them. Mrs. Jacobson was the only one who had even remotely acted with amenity. 10 days my butt. I hadn't heard a single civil word from this person all day, and had no intention of tolerating her sorry attitude any longer than necessary. I would get this coach home in 2. The less time spent with her the better. I went outside, disconnected the external power and water lines, went back inside, sat in the driver's seat, started the engine, put Houston, Texas, in the GPS, raised the levelers, put that sucker in gear and headed south. It was 6 p.m. and I hadn't wanted to start until the next morning, but little Miss Attitude in the bedroom changed my mind. By 8 o'clock, I had crossed into the United States and had cleared customs. She had to come out long enough for that, then retreated back to the bedroom. The fuel tanks were full, so I had 200 gallons of number 1 diesel fuel, and that big Cummins engine wanted to rock and roll, so we did. At 7 the next morning we were in Burley, Idaho. I had stopped twice during the night to make coffee and sandwiches, and was more than a bit tired. I felt rather than saw little Miss Attitude. She sat in the passenger seat and looked out the windshield. After a few minutes she spoke. "I'm hungry. Is there anything to eat?" Just hearing her speak made my tiredness evaporate, and my desire to end this trip quickly increase. Remembering what she told me the evening before when I asked if there was anything good to eat, "I'm not your ducking maid," I said as I pressed down on the accelerator pedal. She glared at me, then stormed back to the bedroom. A little before 9 I really had to piss, so I pulled into a rest area. I went to the bathroom on the coach and pissed. When I came out, she had the front door open and was stepping off the coach. "If you get off this coach you're not getting back on because I'm leaving." I sat back down and pushed the button to release the parking brake. I put the coach in gear just in time for her to storm back into the bedroom. By noon, my butt was dragging. Driving 18 hours is never a good idea, but I had and it'd kick my butt, so I pulled into another rest area, parked between two 18-wheelers, and lay down on the sofa. I was out almost immediately. I awoke to the hum of that Cummins diesel and the feeling of movement. I sat up and looked at my watch. I had slept for 5 hours. Miss Attitude was in the driver's seat and we were rolling fast. I stood up and walked to where I could look over her shoulder. I watched for a couple of minutes and decided that she knew what she was doing. Her grandfather had apparently taught her well. I fixed a cup of coffee and sat in the passenger seat and sipped. 2 hours and not a word. Good. I was starting to get concerned about our fuel situation, however. We had been going about 25 hours or so. At an average speed of 60, we had gone approximately 1,500 miles. At 8 miles per gallon, we had burned most of our fuel. I decided to broach the subject. "We should probably stop at the next truck stop for fuel." No response. "Excuse me, but we might need fuel." "I took care of it while your sorry butt was snoring." She was full of surprises, this girl. I went back to the sofa and was soon back asleep. I had not seen her use the bathroom, eat or drink. She must have accomplished both while I slept. 3 more hours I slept while she drove. I was impressed with her ability to drive and control her bladder. Finally, she pulled into a truck stop in Dumas, Texas, and parked. It was a little after 10 p.m. She got up, and I watched as she fixed a sandwich, took a soda from the refrigerator and disappeared into the bedroom. That was my cue to drive. So, I did. After fixing 2 chicken salad sandwiches and brewing a thermos of coffee, I sat back in the driver's seat and headed for Houston. I stopped once during the night to piss and get some Cheetos and coffee. At 8 the next morning I pulled into the lot at the dealership in Houston. I needed to sleep, but I also needed to use the bathroom, so I opened the door and stepped down. It was the first time I had gotten off the coach since we went through US Customs. When was that? A week ago. It wasn't, of course, but it sure as hell felt like it. Actually, it had been less than 40 hours ago. My butt was dragging, but at least I was finished with little Miss Attitude. I used the bathroom generally reserved for our customers because I really needed to go. I stepped out just in time to see the Jacobson's car headed out the gate. The driver's window was open and there was a middle finger high in the air. I returned the salute. It was almost time for the staff to start arriving, so I thought I would brew a pot of coffee in the employees' break room. When I went in, I felt the sofa calling my name, so I answered. I didn't move until after 3 in the afternoon. I got up, yawned, scratched my bum and started out the door. There was a note in large letters telling me to see the boss if I ever woke up. I walked down the hall and knocked. "Come in." I entered. "You know, the other employees are getting really tired of you monopolizing the break room." I yawned. "I received a phone call this morning. From Mrs. Jacobson." I scratched my butt again and sat. "It was a very interesting conversation." Pause. "She wanted to know how you did it." I was in a hurry to get back, so I forced myself to drive too long and too hard. "Oh, we know how you got home." She was interested in knowing how you did it without unaliving her granddaughter. "What?" Apparently the granddaughter is a real pain in the butt, and seems to have no real regard for other people's feelings. The Jacobsons didn't want to send her home with you, but didn't want her with them either. She caused them nothing but embarrassment the entire time she was with them on their trip. The grandson left because he couldn't stand being cooped up with her in the coach any longer. I know how he feels. The only reason I spent so much time driving is every time I gripped the steering wheel, I thought of my hands being on her throat, and it felt so good I didn't want to stop. He laughed. Anyway, they're happy you made it home okay. Mr. Jacobson should be discharged in another week or so. All indications are that he will be good as new after a little recovery period. They want us to service the coach. We will, and we'll have one of the guys take it to their place. That's good news, both about him and keeping the coach. I thought they might want to sell it. Oh, hell no. They love it and have even talked about becoming full-time reviewers. Okay, so now I want you to go home for a couple of days and rest up. No, but gosh darn it. Just do what I tell you to do. It might give the other employees a chance to get their break room back. I had been gone only 3 days, but it seemed like much longer. I went home, took a much-needed shower and shave and went to bed. I probably slept 30 hours out of the next 2 days, but at some point I was going to have to rejoin the real world. The first step in that regard was, I suppose, to check my phone and see what I had missed. I had given absolutely no thought to it over the past several days. I started looking for it. I looked in the pockets of the clothes I had worn on the Vancouver trip and it wasn't there. I called my boss and asked him to check the break room and the coach to see if it was there. It wasn't. Shit. How many customer calls had I missed? I headed for the dealership. There were several messages from customers and I started returning them. By mid-afternoon I was pretty well caught up. I had gone to the employee's break room and fixed myself a cup of coffee and had started back to my cubicle when I saw her come in. Little Miss Attitude. I turned and headed for the service area. I had been there hiding for about 10 minutes when the POS system sounded. Trey, come to my office, please. Trey to my office. I took my time and sipped my coffee. Trey, my office please. I knocked. Come in. Oh good, there you are. I believe you know Darla Jacobson. She was telling me about the trip back from Canada. She just sat there. I looked at him in disbelief. I, of course, had told him all about the trip. He had a twinkle in his eye I had only seen a couple of times. Once when the dealership had an exceptional month of sales and he had seen nothing but dollar signs. The other time was when his twin sons had both received full-ride scholarships to the University of Texas. The bastard was enjoying this. He grinned. Miss Jacobson came to return your cell phone. Apparently you left it in her grandparents' car. Just then his phone rang. If the two of you will excuse me, I have to take this call. She stood and I indicated that she should precede me out of the office. She walked into the showroom and I followed at what I thought was a safe distance. She stopped and I did likewise. She turned to face me and reached her hand out. My phone was in it. I was too far away from her to take it, so she took a couple of steps toward me. I moved back the same number of steps. She almost smiled. Am I really that bad? She took several steps toward a nearby table and put the phone on it. Yes. She moved away from the table, and I moved to pick up my phone and head back to the service area. The thought of saying thank you never entered my mind. Trey. I stopped and cautiously turned back to her. I heard some of your messages. I couldn't help it. I heard them as they were being left. You did my grandparents a huge favor and you are dealing with your own problems. Trey, I'm so sorry I acted the way I did. She turned and walked out of the dealership. Well, ain't it the shiz. She has a soft side. And it even seemed sincere. I went to my cubicle and sat. It was just a couple of minutes later when there was a tremendous crashing sound outside. I looked toward the street and saw that at least 2 cars were involved. Normally I steer clear of things like this and let the professionals deal with it, but one of the salesmen who had been outside came in and said, Trey, I think that silver car is the lady who came to see you. Oh, shy. I ran to the crash site. It was her. The EMTs weren't there yet, but there was one person who was trying to stop the bleeding on Darla's scalp. Someone else was working on what appeared to be a broken arm. Darla looked up and saw me, and this time she did actually smile. You always seem to catch me at my best. Then she passed out. The EMTs arrived shortly after that and stabilized both Darla and a passenger in the other car, and took them to the hospital. I overheard them tell the investigating police officer which hospital they were going to. I went back to work. I had been at my desk for about 15 minutes when I remembered the Jacobsons. I thought I should call them and let them know about Darla. I did and reassured them that she didn't appear to be in any real danger, cuts, bruises and probably a broken arm, but I thought she would be okay. I heard Mrs. Jacobson tell her husband. Then I heard his response. Broken arm. Too bad it wasn't her neck. Might have knocked some humanity into her. After sufficient chastisement to her husband, Mrs. Jacobson asked me if I would call Darla's parents and let them know. She gave me their number and I did. Then I remembered my phone. There were 54 texts, half from my mother and the rest from Judy, prospective customers, and one from Michael Hamilton. I called the prospective customers and made 4 appointments for the next couple of days. I ignored the others. I left work at 5 and headed home. The hospital the EMTs said they were going to was nowhere near my house, but I found myself there nonetheless. A check with the information desk and I found out that her room was 646. I went there. When I walked in, she already had visitors. Her parents. Trey, meet my parents. Mom, Dad, this is Trey Taylor. Trey, my parents, Ralph and Joanne Jacobson. Nice to meet you, Trey. Darla hasn't stopped talking about your trip, said her mother. I'll bet she hasn't, I thought. How could you stand being in that small bus with her for 2 days? She would have driven me crazy, said her father. It isn't a bus, Dad. It's a coach. It's a bus. Pretty fancy, but still a bus. Ignore him, Trey. How are you? Fine except for a broken arm and some stitches. Well, I better go. Just thought I should check in on you. Take care of yourself. Thanks for stopping by. Oh, Trey, said her father, thank you for calling my parents and us. You're most welcome. Goodbye. I went home and debated with myself about calling my mother. It was a short debate. The negative side won because I didn't see an affirmative side. And so it went for about 3 weeks. My mother and Judy tried repeatedly to call, and I ignored them. Even my stepfather called. I talked to him but ended the call when he tried to put my mother on the phone. My attorney had sent the divorce papers to the address Judy had given me. I guess she was enjoying living with and ducking Morrison, because her signature was big, bold and in bright red magic marker. Her pregnancy, if it actually existed, was never mentioned. In about 2 months I would be a free man. I started thinking of being single. The thought of that prompted other thoughts. Like the celibacy I had endured. Celibacy holy, it has been a long dry spell. All of a sudden my balls started to ache. I needed to get laid. I sat for just a minute before going to the bathroom to shower and get ready to go out to eat. I had just finished dressing when my phone rang. Trey Taylor. Hello Trey, this is Dottie Jacobson. Well, hello Mrs. Jacobson. How are you? And how's the patient? Call me Dottie, please, Trey. He's fine. Actually, he's better than fine. We're planning our next trip and he wants to go to Colorado, but I'm a bit concerned about him driving in those mountains. What do you think? Dottie, that coach won't let him get in any trouble. All he has to do is turn on the Jake brake and leave it on, and as long as he doesn't try to break any speed limits, he will be fine. That's what he says. He has read articles on mountain driving and is excited to try it. I think I'm going to get some Valium before we go. She laughed as she said it. In my experience with them I was positive that she would go with him any place he wanted to go, whenever he wanted to go there and vice versa. I love that couple. Anyway, the reason I called was to invite you to a little barbecue we are having to celebrate Robert's recovery. It will be at our place this Friday at 6. Bring your wife. We would love to meet her. It dawned on me that I had never discussed my personal life with them, and apparently, Darla, after hearing some of my texts, hadn't either, so they had no idea I was almost divorced. Thank you, Dottie. I would love to come. See you then. It had been a good week. Usually, I'm happy if I sell 1 RV a week. This week it was 3. One of them was a high-end used coach which used to belong to a country music star who upgraded to a newer, fancier model. My commissions for the week were very nice. Very nice, indeed. I pulled up to the Jacobson estate at exactly 6. There was a big garage set away from the main house where, I assumed, they kept their coach. After I drove it back from Vancouver it had been serviced and cleaned, and the service department had returned it to them. I knew they had money because they wrote a very substantial check for the coach, but their estate was spectacular. I pulled up to the front of the house, and a valet parked my car. Now I've been to 6 county fairs and to go ducking, but I had never had a valet park my car at a private residence. I was directed through the house and to the backyard. There were about 50 people already there. Dottie saw me and hugged me and asked where my wife was. I explained that I was in the process of getting a divorce. She held me at arm's length and told me how my wife was an idiot. She then hugged my arm and led me toward the rest of the guests. Listen to me, Trey. When you are ready, I know of several nice young ladies who would love to meet someone like you. She then introduced me to the other guests as a friend, not as the guy who sold them their coach. I knew that I was walking with some pretty big dogs in this crowd, and that any nice young ladies she would introduce me to would be way out of my league. I decided to stay for just a short time and leave. I had just finished a brisket sandwich and beer and was looking for Dottie and Robert to say goodbye when I saw Darla storm away from some guy. I hadn't known she was here, but probably should have assumed she would be. I had seen that look before and didn't want any part of it, so I turned so she wouldn't see me. Too late. Come on, Trey, she said, grabbing my arm. First Dottie and now Darla. This was a family of arm grabbers. She led me inside to the library. The house had a ducking library. That guy is a ducking jerk. He said I had an attitude problem and needed help. I started to leave. Where are you going? Leaving before you kick me out because I agree with him. He didn't have to say it out loud and in front of people. Somebody should. Darn it, Trey. You need to be on my side. Why? The only civil words you've ever spoken to me were when you were lying in the street bleeding and probably delirious. She plopped rather than sat. I remained standing. We never looked at each other. How's the arm? I asked. It itches like hell under the cast. I have to carry this so I can scratch. She pulled what looked like a back scratcher out of the cast. It had tiny fingers so it would fit between the cast and her arm, so she could reach the itchy spot. I'll be glad when this thing is off. Indicating the cast. I have to go. Trey. Yes. If I promise to behave, will you have dinner with me? After a short pause, I said. Darla, I'm going through a divorce so I don't need any more stress, and I would probably do something to piss you off and make it worse. So I don't think dinner is a good idea. I left. Saturday morning my mother rang my doorbell. I let her in. Here's the deal. I have given it a lot of thought and I agree with you. There are some things that we should compromise on and some things we shouldn't. Fidelity in a marriage is on the not compromise list. You reminded me of the absolute hell I went through with your father, and nobody should have to do that. I apologize for even considering wanting you to take Jody back. I was selfish in that I was just thinking about the baby and the possibility of having a grandchild. Please forgive me. I did and we hugged. We chatted for another hour or so, hugged again and she left. Mid-morning Monday my phone rang. Trey Taylor. Good morning Trey, this is Michael Hamilton. I have news. I don't know when he got on a first-name basis with me, but what the hell? What kind of news? Stan Morrison called and asked for his job back. They said no. I laughed. Just thought you would like to know. Thank you, Michael. Now I'm on a first-name basis with him. Just before noon, the Jacobsons' coach pulled into the yard and parked right in front of the building. I was with customers so I couldn't go out and greet them, but I was able to see it. I sat and talked with my prospects for at least 30 minutes, and nobody came out of the coach. I escorted them out to their car and then went to the coach and rang the doorbell. Darla answered. Hi. Come in. I stepped up into the coach. When you enter a coach like this, the door is right beside the passenger seat. There are generally 3 or 4 steps up into the coach. When you get to the top of the steps, you have to immediately turn left or you bump into the driver's seat. When the coach is moving and a passenger is in their seat, the floor slides out to cover the steps, so that their feet are on solid footing and not dangling in the stairwell. Anyway, I stepped up into the coach and followed her to the living area. Have a seat. I sat. There was the wonderful smell of lasagna coming from the oven. There were 2 glasses of wine on the kitchen counter. She handed me one of them and took the other for herself. She reached hers out to me indicating that we should clink them. We did and we both took sips. It was a very nice Chianti. I had said nothing up to this point. She leaned back against the stove and jerked away from the heat. Then she moved a bit and leaned back against the counter. She took a rather large gulp. You said dinner was out, but I figured lunch might be okay. I also thought I might embarrass or piss you off in public, so I figured this might be a bit more private. I asked Grandma and Grandpa if I could use the coach, and when I told them why, they thought it was a good idea. He just made me promise that I wouldn't drive back when I got pissed. Notice I said when I got pissed, not if. He knows you pretty well, doesn't he? Instead of the expected red-faced explosion, she took a rather large gulp of her Chianti. Her face was reddish, but she didn't explode. I took a sip of mine. She turned her back to me and stayed that way even after refilling her glass. I saw her take a deep breath and turn back to me. I hope you're hungry. I made it this morning. My lasagna is really good even if I say it myself. She busied herself with the salad and garlic bread. I thought to myself that she was doing pretty well with the cast on one arm. The doorbell rang. Would you get that, please? I stood and walked to the dashboard and pressed the button. The door opened. My boss was standing there. He looked up at me. Everything all right? I looked down at him. So far. I said as I closed the door and returned to my seat and wine. I watched her potter around and it seemed that she was enjoying doing it. Her moves were natural, so it was obvious she knew her way around a kitchen, even one as small as this. I smiled, but only for a moment. I knew that one of us was going to do something to piss the other off. It was just a matter of time. She told me to sit at the dining area table. I did. Generally speaking, in a coach which is 45 feet long and 8.5 feet wide, there's not a lot of room inside. The slide-outs increase the width in the living area and bedroom to around 11 feet. The living room starts immediately behind the driver's and passenger seats. Then you have the dining and kitchen areas across from each other. Then the bathroom and shower, and at the rear of the coach is the bedroom. We ate and chatted and realized that we had finished the bottle of Chianti. I also realized that neither had pissed the other off. After a couple of hours, I decided I needed to go back to work. Darla, thank you. This was a pleasant surprise, and the food was delicious. It was my pleasure. I started for the door and she followed. I had taken a step down to leave. Trey. I turned my head to look at her. She leaned down and kissed me, softly and tenderly. Neither of us knew who was more shocked. There was a long pause as we just looked at each other. Is dinner still off the table? She asked with a twinkle in her eye. How about tonight? Love to. Say 7 o'clock. That was just a few hours away. She gave me her address and I started to leave. Again. But we kissed. Again. And again. It took me another 10 minutes to leave. When I finally stepped off the coach, I saw 6 faces looking at me through the showroom window. My boss was one of them. When they saw that I had seen them, they all scattered except my boss. He opened the door for me when I entered. Well, I'm going home to get ready for a date tonight. We laughed. 10 minutes later, Darla drove the coach off the lot. I was on my way to her house when my phone rang. Trey Taylor. So, you managed not to kill each other, huh? Hello, Dottie. I assume Robert is listening. You bet you Bippy, I'm listening. We have already heard her story, now we want to hear yours. I laughed. You know a gentleman never tells. Horse hockey. Hush, Robert. Trey, it was funny when she asked us to borrow the coach. She was nervous and didn't want to tell us why she wanted it, but Robert wouldn't let her have it unless she did. So, she did. As she was telling us, she got excited and told us about the lasagna she fixed. I asked her how she knew you like lasagna. I just know, Grandma. And she blushed. Trey. I've known that girl all her life and didn't know she knew how, but she actually blushed. Trey piped up, Robert, I don't believe I'm saying this, especially given that girl's terrible attitude. Robert, what's your language? Yes, dear. Anyway, Trey, as far as I know, that girl has never done anything like this. She may piss me. Robert. I'm sorry. She may make me mad, but she's still my granddaughter, so you better treat her right. Do you understand? Yes, sir, but I think you might be jumping the gun just a bit. Bless H, sorry Dottie. Trey, just don't hurt her. Okay. She has had some pretty rough experiences in her relationships. She is, as you know, very attractive, and it seems that all her life men have tried to take advantage of her. It started back in high school, and she has had trouble dealing with it. Unfortunately, her attitude is her defense mechanism, and she uses it to avoid getting close to someone only to be disappointed by them. The problem is she has trouble distinguishing friends from enemies, but it is only a facade. There's a nice girl in there someplace. We just have trouble finding her sometimes, said Dottie. I wouldn't hurt her, Dottie, and Robert. Good. They said together. But have you asked her not to hurt me? And we all laughed. I had no sooner ended that call when my phone rang again. Trey Taylor. Trey, this is Judy. Silence. I went from happy to pissed in an instant, but decided to hear her out. Are you still there? What do you want, Judy? I thought you should know that Jody. Stop right there. I don't want to hear anything about her. Trey, please. Just listen for a minute. Yesterday she kicked Stan out for having an affair. Earlier today he went back into the house and beat her up. She's in the hospital, Trey. Her nose is broken. He knocked her down and kicked her. She is in intensive care. And Stan is in jail. What about her baby? There isn't one. She lied about that to try to get you to take her back. Well, she certainly fooled my mother. She fooled us all, Trey. I'm sorry she's hurt, but it doesn't concern me anymore. And as far as I'm concerned, Morrison can rot in jail. She's still your wife until the divorce is final. She stopped being my wife when she got in his car, and she made it official when she signed the paperwork. Whatever happens in her life now has nothing to do with me. Goodbye. Darla lived in a gated community. After seeing her grandparents' estate, that didn't come as any surprise, but the reaction of the guard at the gate did. He asked who I was there to see and I told him. Really? And he started laughing. He was laughing when he called her to see if she was expecting me, and he was still laughing as he opened the gate. I heard him say good luck as I drove through the gate. 15 minutes later, when we went through the gate on our way out, he was on his phone and was still laughing. I got the impression she was not the most liked person in that community. I discovered that she was a meat and potatoes kind of girl. She ordered a medium rare ribeye steak with blue cheese, butter, and a baked potato. That's my kind of meal. I had a fleeting thought about how she was going to cut the steak with her arm in a cast, but she managed. We both laughed at how awkward it was, and I even offered to cut it for her, but she struggled through. She managed to eat about half of her steak before ignoring it and concentrated on her drink. Our waiter suggested he put the rest of our food in a doggy bag. I didn't know you had doggy bags here. There's a first time for everything, he said. We stopped at the security gate to key in the password, and the same guard was there. Rather than laughing, he had a surprised look on his face. I commented to Darla about it. I don't have many dates, and he isn't used to seeing me come home from them in the same car I leave in. I usually come home in a cab. That made sense to me. When we got to her house, she invited me in. What would you like to drink? Gin and tonic. We sat and sipped, not talking much. Finally, she stood and crossed to stand over me. I looked up at her. Trey, I'm not too good at this. I haven't had a lot of experience, so you're going to have to help me. I put my glass down and stood. We kissed. Slowly and softly. I unbuttoned her blouse starting at the top. The blouse was still tucked in, so I pulled it out of her skirt and finished with the rest of the buttons. Then I pushed the blouse off her shoulders and it floated to the floor. I looked and her eyes were closed. She was breathing a bit quicker. I could see her nip knobs trying to punch holes in her bra, and they seemed to get bigger with each breath. I really wanted to take the bra off so I could see and touch what my imagination told me were perfect melons, but I restrained myself. I hadn't touched her for a few seconds, so she opened her eyes and looked at me. Her eyes lowered to my chest as she saw that I was unbuttoning my shirt. She said she didn't have a lot of experience, but neither had I up to now. My stick had only been in one other mouth, and that was Jody's. It had also only been in one kitty, that too was Jody's. My brain kicked in and a fleeting thought crossed my mind. The waiting period was not yet over for my divorce to be final, so was I in the process of doing what Jody had done. It didn't take long for me to decide. She signed the papers, so as far as I was concerned, I was a single man and was going to enjoy this. Limited experience or not, Darla certainly seemed to enjoy giving head. Give me a minute to catch my breath. I pulled her to her feet and held her for a long time, then started to take her to the sofa, where we could get some serious ducking done. I took a step and fell on my face. It seems you can't walk too well with your pants around your ankles. Darla dropped to her knees beside me and started kissing me. We stayed like that for a couple of minutes, just looking at each other. I reached with both of my hands, pulled her face to mine and kissed her again. Hard. While we were kissing, she moved her body over mine and lowered herself onto it. I was ducking, or rather, being ducked, by only my second kitty ever, and I was in heaven. We were both desperate to come, but neither wanted to end, so we slowed, hoping to prolong the sensations we were creating. Eventually the inevitable happened and we reached a point of no return. We both exploded with the biggest, most wonderful physical and emotional release known to humankind. There were no screams, grunts or moans. Our eyes were still locked on each other as she lowered her torso so she could rest on my chest. She moved her head so she could fully rest on me, and we slept. We were like that for about an hour. I have no idea how she managed it. I was comfortable, but she had to be miserable. My eyes opened when I felt her stir. She raised herself, put her hands on the floor on either side of my head. I think we should spend more time getting to like each other, don't you? And we did. We made love, slowly and gently, 2 more times that night. At 9 the next morning I called my boss and told him I wouldn't be in. Why? I'm still on my date from last night. He laughed. Darla and I took a shower together, then ate breakfast. By noon we had ducked twice more. The last time was different from the others. At one point she didn't just reach for my stick, she grabbed it. And when she kissed me, she jerked my head to her and crushed her lips on mine, and she slammed her body against me. The gentleness was gone. I sensed something else. But on those occasions when the partner, or environment, or events, or even alcohol, provides sufficient additional stimuli, the sex can be out of this world. A slap on the bum, a tug on the hair, or anything else out of the realm of what we call normal, can heighten the sexual experience considerably. That's what Judy had told me. My hand went to the back of Darla's head. I grabbed a handful of hair and pulled. Her head jerked back and her eyes opened wide. She took a sharp intake of breath, looked at me and smiled. Dug me hard, you custard. And I did. Thanks for listening. As usual, drop a like and follow me, my friends. Cheers.